Let's be brutally honest right now. That's a big question.
I'm looking for someone who doesn't want to go to base camp, but they want to go to the very top.
Whether it's here, India, New York.
Civilization was born at happy hour.
That's what wins. That's what stands out. That's what people are interested in. That's what I want to know. The Hospopreneurs Podcast with James Henderson. Hello and welcome to episode 107 of the Hospopreneurs Podcast. Identical twin brothers Matthew and Terry Squadrito are the co-founders of Squad Inc., a design and branding studio based in Sydney. Founded in 2008, Squad Inc. have helped shape some of the most successful forward-thinking food and beverage, destination and wellness brands in Australia, including Archie Rose, Felons, Sofi, Spritz and the grounds of Alexandria, just to name a few. As one voice, almost literally, you'll hear today as they're very similar, Matthew and Terry share a combined storytelling passion that stems from a childhood learning of their rich Italian heritage, its food and culture. Hello and welcome, Terry and Matthew. It's a pleasure to have you on today. I'm very excited to get into the interview. As you know, the first question that I like to ask on this program is, what is your crazy hospitality story? So who would like to take that one, Terry or Matthew?
I think I can take it. So, one of the most memorable hospitality stories that I have is eating at Heartwood in Tulum a few years ago. For me, the reason why it stuck with me so much was because it was just so authentic and rustic and real. And that's exactly what I love in a dining hospitality experience, is that you just pull away all the pretenses and you just enjoy really good quality food. You're immersed in the smells, the sights. You're outside, you're seeing the fire that's cooking the food. And for me, that is just the epitome of perfection in terms of a dining experience.
And we're obviously recording this during the coronavirus pandemic, and a lot of people are talking about the post-crisis sort of hospitality experience. How do you think that the new way of things is going to affect how people perceive that experience that you're describing? Is that going to be more, less important? Is the product, is the company? What is it about that really ties everything together that people are going to focus on post-coronavirus?
Yeah, look, I'd like to take this because we were just chatting about this earlier, Terry and I, that, a lot of the storytelling aspect around venues, people, product, place is still really relevant in even this climate, because people are buying into, when they buy something, whether they can sit in the venue or not, it's becoming clearer that they have to really work hard on the storytelling aspect of what they're actually feeding people. Where is it from? And you're getting really interesting collaborations and focusing on produce. So for us, as kind of brand curators or brand storytellers, it's kind of shining a light on the importance of communicating the story of provenance and food and makers in a way that's engaging and exciting. It's going to drive people to go and try the food and not necessarily put so much pressure on the venue experience itself.
And obviously, in terms of telling those brand stories, that's what you guys do. So I'm going to ask that in a minute. But before we do that, I really like to get things on a more, the words I use are macro, wide scale, abstract sort of level. So why do you do what you do? And I'd like to know how that differs between each of you and then what you do together. So Matthew, I'll stick with you there.
Oh, good question. I live for the communication between people, the interaction between people, makers, artisans, you name it. Anyone who's just passionate about their craft is what kind of gets me up out of bed in the morning, definitely. And that really has driven the type of work that we intrinsically are suited to work on. I think just definitely hearing stories and seeing how we can, find those hidden golden nuggets in their stories and bring them to light, because people just love it and we just want people to hear about it.
I want to press on that a little bit more, because it sounds like what really drives you is uncovering and then amplifying those stories. I'd like to know, what is it specifically about people that are passionate about their stories that really drives you? What is it that sits behind your answer there?
I think what really drives us is that everyone has a story, an underlying story, and a reason for how they came to be where they are. And I think the creatively problem solving that position that they have, or the most unique, compelling thing about their business, their venue, their products, is that translation or the storytelling aspect of taking that into graphics, whether it's, a brand tagline or naming an estate. To bring that together in a marketable way, to bringing those two worlds together, the emotive side of it with bringing it into commercial side as a product on the shelf or a venue itself, is the balance. And that's the tug of war that we work with every day. And it's the challenge that really excites, because there's so many ideas, there's so many great stories. It's making it realistic. It's actually making it come to life, and realizing it is the challenge. So for us, it's, can we bring this to light? Can we, name this state after these two people and create a mascot for it that represents their name in Italian? Like things like that. It's the creative visualizing of the story is probably it in a nutshell.
And obviously how you do that is what I'm going to ask a bit further later in the episode. But Terry, I know Matthew's given us a very comprehensive answer, and I'm sure that ties into your mutual why. I'm interested though in whether you have a different way of looking at things yourself, and then how you've brought those together as a team.
Well, I do. I agree with all of what Matthew's saying, and we share that vision together. But I feel like if you wanted to climb as high as possible, then I get up out of bed because I want to see incredible makers and thinkers succeed at what they do. And a lot of them don't have those tools to realize the brand that surrounds the product or the place. And I guess another way of saying it is we want them to find their true identity. And what we do is, instead of businesses piecing together bits and pieces of what they like from other admiring brands, we drive through a strategic process on how to create something that's uniquely theirs. So something that's unique, ownable, distinctive, and truthful to what they're doing. And then what we were talking about is, how do we amplify that? Once we get to the heart of hearts of what they do and why they do it, how do we give that octopus tentacles, is what we use in a matter of words. Is like, what are all those different tentacles? It's a product, it's a website, it's video, it's great messaging, it's curating that venue experience. All those little pieces, when they come together like an orchestra, is when we see it actually as a complete living brand. That's actually that moment where we get a lot of fulfillment out of what we do.
It's interesting because the terminology used is similar to how I like to describe things, that they are these appendages, these tentacles, and ultimately your objective is to draw attention and awareness and understanding of a central idea, a central concept that is within your design if things are governed correctly and applied correctly. And so those appendages are ultimately just different channels to speak to different people in different ways, or sometimes hopefully the same people, maybe not the same individuals, but the same types of people across different channels. So it's interesting hearing the way that you described that as well. I want to ask you guys how you ultimately draw those ideas out of the people who struggle to express them themselves.
I think we recently discussed this with another hospitality consultant, and I think I can give you a very detailed explanation, but I really feel like it does really start in identifying the heart. So, that purpose of why people exist. And if we start there, then you can't climb any higher. So once that's nailed, and that's, through a series of workshops and discussions, a lot of discussions and immersion into the product. So going to the venue, trying the product. I guess once you get to that point, you got to work out what you do. And more often than not, that's actually undefined as well, because although we are strategic branding consultants and creatives, we also dip our toe into that commerciality side of things, advising on helping them shape what products they should actually offer as well. And when we articulate those reasons to believe, what are those 10 things that people just must have? And to draw those out and work them into a story is actually another exercise that we go through. I think knowing intimately who you're talking to, who are they talking to? And conveniently, we work in a very specific, specialized area of branding where we focus very much on that premium artisanal product. So that we understand that mindset. And I think you can draw a lot of data, but actually the way we work is we want to understand what excites these people. We want to understand what are their needs that we need to satisfy, but we also want to understand what they hate, what pisses them off. And if we can work through that and create a list and understand what those sweet spots are to strike their attention, then we can work out ways of shaping a brand and products around satisfying as many of those as possible. And then I also think once you have that into play and you understand who's competing for your piece of the pie, I think it's about picking that position, like that simple exercise of putting your mark X on the map of where you want your brand to be positioned and really sticking to it and having that single-minded proposition that you don't deviate from, I think is really important. I think, there's a whole bunch of other things that we look at, but those are the main areas that we really focus on. That's kind of the foundation. To build on that foundation is what we're talking about, is like giving, if you've got a skeleton, we're at that stage, like how do we give it clothes? How do we give it a hairstyle? How do we, shape the way it speaks? It's very much that brand as a person. So really want to shape the personality and tone of voice. And then it's just a matter of like what we were talking about, is like bringing it to life in all these different exciting mediums, whether it's in content or like how do we bring it to life on packaging and etc. I think that's like really a few steps of how we approach it.
And in that, the analogies you've used are very visual, which I suspected would be the case with your descriptions, obviously being very visually oriented and graphic driven. But as you've described, your work does sit behind a lot of that as well. There's more that sits behind those things. I know we've kept that answer on a relatively high level, but just to open that just a little more before we move on, what are some tools that you use to get your clients thinking in the way that you need them to be thinking, to get the answers that you want?
Well, I think getting them in a room with a big notepad or a sketch pad and having a whole bunch of questions to, I guess, get them excited about their product. I think it's about getting them out of the boardroom, to be honest, and into, say, a bar or where they're actually creating their products on the floor and talking at length and very comfortably about what they love about their products and how they came to make them, and understanding the stories behind that led them to their product. Because if you ask them what's your purpose, they're never going to actually be able to answer that question. It's too hard a question, too specific. So what we rather just say is like, if you could do anything today, what would it be? And we just keep asking the question, why, until they can't actually answer it anymore. They've reached the top of the pyramid. And that's really how we articulate that why. It's where we articulate the heart of hearts. And from there, we can start, I guess, working down to how they work, how they do deliver their promise, and what are the different products that deliver that promise as well.
Another thing I might jump in there is a really good tool that we do is we start to carve out creative territories. Now, it's important that although we love a real single-minded idea for a venue, but it's really important that if we're coming up with a concept for that space, there's different ways to creatively tackle it. So we try to think of it as we've got like 3 buckets. The buckets are representative as a big piece of sheet of paper. And there could be an idea for each one. The idea for one could be, the fact that this distillery or this venue is a seaside location. So I'm going to talk about it's a coastal seaside position. How do we bring that to life through that? Another position could be its tropical position, because it's tropical and there's lots of reinventions of classic tropical food and serves. And so what we try to do is we try to say there's different idea territories or creative territories that we can operate in. And a name, for example, could come out of either of those. Once we start brainstorming visuals, and it could be cutting out images and sticking into the sheet. It could be, writing words that come to mind. Abundance, lush, oasis, whatever it might be. It's just literally whatever comes to mind. It could be a memory of a holiday that you've had up in Noosa or Italy, wherever it may be, but obviously within the boundaries of the concept. And you just put that all on the sheet. So it's pure creative thinking, unadulterated, it's unfiltered. You're just getting it up because you just don't know where it could take you. And so from there, you're really seeing like almost like a visual mood board, a visual snapshot of each creative territory. And that's where you can find these little hidden ideas or moments tucked away in the most unexpected spots. And so I think it's the diversity of your thinking, which really starts to unpack. Instead of saying, we've got this idea, this is what we want, we've seen this other business do it, your job's just to kind of make it pretty. I think that goes against the whole idea of like freedom with creativity and really allowing the idea to come naturally. So that's a good tool that we use.
With that, you've answered a question I normally like to save for a little bit later around creativity, the creative process, and how you foster that yourselves. Actually, I want to take the opportunity now to ask that. So how do you foster that within yourself? So you've described how you create an environment for others. How do you get yourselves into a state of mind that you're thinking in that open sort of mode?
I think it's important to obviously be healthy and in a positive mindset. So, obviously I'm doing some very in-depth creative thinking. I usually like to do that in the mornings before noon. I like to do some exercise and meditate, and that really helps me quiet the noise and just think really clearly and logically about the problem that we need to solve, or the idea that needs to be created out of the brief. And then I guess once I'm in that good mindset, I think just some good conversation with Matthew, to be honest, is we always get to the great ideas when we're together actually, and just having a chat over a coffee. I think it's just like a sibling thing where he's actually stealing the ideas out of my head. But I do feel like that's kind of like the magic, that enjoying the morning, getting active, and then really having open, bouncing off ideas off each other is like the way I kind of can get to that creative idea.
Do you have a theory as to why it's the morning? Because, people tend to describe those same things, being early mornings or late nights. Do you have an idea behind why it is you sort of cluster to that time?
I think just it's the way I'm wired is like, I don't, clock on at 9 and clock off at 5. And then I don't think about the actual project or the brief that I'm working on until I start work again. As soon as it's in there and I'm excited about it, I can't get it out of my head. So usually as soon as I wake up, the cogs start to turn and I start to think. And I feel like maybe it's been in autopilot while I've been sleeping, because when I wake up, I'm full of ideas. So it's usually those magic 3 hours where I really just need to focus and get them all onto a page as quickly as possible.
Fantastic. You guys have worked with some very interesting companies, high-profile Australian businesses, and there may be more that I don't even know about. I'm sure there are. How do you incorporate some more fundamental design principles and also to articulate those principles to listeners who maybe aren't aware of what design is all about?
When we talk about creating, a brand identity, I think it's important to understand we've spoken about the idea of storytelling and extracting the essence or the unique attribute of a brand and translating that into something visual. And that can be content, it can be graphics, it can be whatever. But really at the beginning of it, it's really what is the visual identity of it? What is the logo type? What is the brand mark that we're trying to extract here? And symbology is a really important aspect of that. It can really be a tool that's quite direct in its communication, especially when you've got limited space, whether it's a product, you've got a limited space, or you've got one key moment of signage on the outside of a building and you need to communicate the idea directly. So in terms of some tools, we start to look at, from our creative brainstorming exercise, are there some certain symbols or visuals that we feel that we need to consolidate or condense into, a really unified brand mark or presence? And that could come through in terms of an idea for how we would treat typography. So if we're talking about, say, a coastal distillery, maybe we want to incorporate some of those unique attributes of the water or the ripples into the design. Or if we're a distillery that is foundation on sort of a prohibition roots or some sort of nod to tradition or an era past, we look at explorations of symbolism. For example, like Archie Rose's bottle is an Archie Rose located in Rosebery. It's the first distillery in the city of Sydney in 160 years. So there was something in that led us to look at the symbolism of that prohibition era, and that was in the form of this squat bottle. And so symbolism, whether it is a graphic that goes into logo type or someone's name translated into a brand mark or a bottle form, it comes in different ways. And it's for us to take those symbols and pull the ones that we think are most distinctive or most compelling that can be translated into a visual that can become iconic for that brand or most recognized from that brand. That's where we're distilling, the graphics into something that is a timeless representation of who they want to be and where they want to go.
I might just also add to that is as you start very broad and brainstorm a whole range of visuals and iconography, etc., we're constantly validating it against some of those fundamental points that we were talking about in the beginning. But one of the main ones is, we'll write down 5 personality attributes with a brief description underneath it. And when we're having internal discussions or whether we're actually presenting to a client, we're always going back to those 5 because they're the moderators, they're our north compass so that we can actually gauge whether we're on track. And so we're not veering too far off out of the personality of the brand. I think that's really important to know as well.
How do you decide the buffer that you give yourselves to venture from the core idea?
A device that we found that's very useful is we take those 5 personality attributes and we start to rate them. And we also can build beyond the 5, but we rate them between 1 and 10. So, for instance, we might focus on one attribute, which might be confidence. And we'll have a look at a spectrum of examples that show a 1 in confidence to a 10 in confidence. And I think that's really important because a word is a word until you invest meaning in it. And a lot of people process these things in different ways. And I think always we feel like a visual interpretation of, say, a personality is very important. And so we might come to the agreement through discussion and with visual aid that this brand is a 7 out of 10. Now, there's no scientific approach to giving it a 7. What it does is it helps us align on where the mark that we want to hit. And yeah, there is a little bit of buffer, but that really helps us gauge it beyond just, say, an open interpretation of the word confidence.
On that note as well, I'd just like to add to it is, in the end, we want a knockout idea. We want someone that's going to really grab someone. And for whatever reason, they just have to go to this venue and move mountains to get there. They'll drive, an hour to experience it or find this product on the shelf. And in the end, you can do the strategy, you can do the personality values and the positioning. But in the end, you've got to really trust gut intuition and really know who you're creating this brand for and just know, will they be excited by this? Like when you visually look at it or you show it to someone, is the idea really single-minded? Does it really grab you? Does it jump off the shelf? And sometimes you kind of just have to push strategy aside and say to yourself, is this really compelling? Is this really jumping out at me? I know it's ticking all these boxes, but I want people to fight over this product. And so we often do that as we go, okay, is it exciting enough? Can this be more wow factor? Is that color too muted? Does that glass need a tint in it? This venue needs some neon. It needs something to draw you into the space. Don't overdo it. There's a lot of, metal finishes and artisanal use of oak and timber, but we just need that pop. It's just not edgy enough. It's just not drawing me into the space. Where's the vibrancy? So it becomes this balance in tone. And we talk about this a lot. It's like you can have strategic creatives and strategic designers, and I've kind of been through a couple of those, and you can have those that are just really nail tone. It's like you're launching an eatery. They're all about a single-minded proposition about producing sandwiches, and they're New York-based sandwiches. Like you just got to know that the tone that needs to come through here, you need to live it. You need to be passionate about the space. You can't just read a brief and execute upon it. And this is really important about the people we collaborate with. If it's a writer, illustrator, designer, photographer, video, we choose people who are specialized in the space that we are specialized in because they love what they do, they're passionate about it, and it really shines through because they know that they're the audience. And so I think that's why I guess we've carved out this space for ourselves as this premium artisanal space because we just love it. Like we love the products and the brands that we represent. We actually consume them. We visit their venues. They're more than just clients to us. They're friends and they're creative people where there's a lot of cross-collaboration that occurs.
Thanks for that, Matthew. Terry, I'm going to pass the next one over to you. I'd like to know what you're learning about or exploring at the moment. So personally, professionally, what is it that you're doing to learn and where's your attention?
Well, at the moment, in terms of my interests or my attention at the moment, things that I've been pondering lately is really just the age of collectibles that we're seeing come about. And going back to this consumer that we know quite intimately is like they've become quite a little bit fickle and are seeking varied experiences. They want choice, and we're really interested at the moment at exploring the idea of how products such as limited release and seasonal products, how they have a purpose beyond just another product to sell. It becomes this what we call the new marketing platform for the artisan, is where you're actually marketing your brand, but you're doing it through a product that you're offering. And it's highly conceptual. It's got a strong storytelling aspect to it. And we love it because of those things. We're innovating packaging. We're taking packaging briefs to another level because of just the nature of them. Like, you know, when you're combining, say, two different artisans together in, say, a collaboration, you would approach that brief completely different to, say, a product you'd be taking to market. So at the moment, Matthew and I, there's a lot of discussion around this trend that's happening around limited release products and, you know, where we can take it and how we can connect the physical product to the digital product. And, you know, it's really exciting for us.
It's interesting because obviously all the elements you described earlier come into play, and with this collaboration between businesses, there's a lot more to play with, but it also makes things more complicated because the boundaries, I guess, change too quite dramatically with common denominators between those brands. There's something there that you mentioned about seasonality and seasonal products. It's obviously a lot more costly for brands to be releasing seasonal products, and they've got to be looking at how they brand that unique range and how they go about those things. And that choice to the consumer doesn't necessarily make them happier. It confuses people a lot of the time. Maybe your answer would be in poor design, that comes down to poor design or implementation of their brand. But I'm interested to know your perspective on why the consumer is overwhelmed with choice.
I guess the overwhelming choice is the saturation of the market with a lot of, I mean, the word craft itself is a word that has lost a lot of its oomph over time, just because the word craft has varying levels of quality attached to it now. So you've got products that aren't made so well with not as quality ingredients all the way up to like ultra premium craft. And you're just seeing distilleries and breweries just sprouting out of the ground. And so there's just this flood of products. And I guess if we look back to like the original craft, like Cooper's was like one of the first craft pale ales, you can see the particular style was just, you know, you would see the bits in the bottom of the glass and it was very understated and it was about the true artisan. A lot of things were in craft and it was really about highlighting the raw ingredients. Since then, like we have seen this complete 360 where if you just look at beer, for instance, you've a lot of illustration, they're very loud, highly conceptual. There's just a lot of noise. There's a lot of noise on the pack. And then on top of that, there's this innovation of the product itself. So even just, we were talking just about the RTD premix category, is like the classifications of these products now are not just straightforward anymore. Like you've got so many types of beers, you have so many types of spirits. So not only people are trying to process the different products within, say, one brand, but they're also trying to process all the different new categories of products that they've never even heard of before. So there's this huge educational milestone they have to overcome. So I guess that's kind of the reason why it's being flooded. We see that as that's an opportunity to create brands and packaging that cut through to the market and deliver information in a really easy way that's tasty and that people want. And we've done that many times, especially for like Archie Rose. And going back to, say, limited release and seasonal products, you're able to create such unique conversations about these unique products, and you're able to build equity into a range of limited release products under, say, a distillery, which strengthen the credibility of that distillery. And I feel like that is one of the key factors why breweries and distilleries, for example, need to innovate with limited release and seasonal products, because it gives them credibility in what they're doing and it's an outlet for their creativity. But like what you said, it could be poor design, which people feel overwhelmed.
So taking that into the next step, so once they've designed those products, how are you noticing businesses, how is their marketing spend being affected by multiple products? Obviously, you've got to spread it a little more thin, but does it come down to a lot more A/B testing, or is there some kind of other process in their marketing? How are businesses changing the way that they're marketing those seasonal and limited release products?
Okay. Well, I'm not privy to the intricacies of how they A/B testing, etc. But we do understand that in terms of how they market these products or the value, say, of a seasonal product or a limited release product, the first thing is success has got to be gauged on a number of levels. Is like, one is obviously the money they make on sales, and that sales is actually the sales of that limited release plus the increase of sales of, say, their core products. The other one is brand loyalty. Brand loyalty rises instantly when you're releasing seasonal products, limited release products, because people are trusting in the brand and what they represent over the product itself. Like, for instance, going back to Archie Rose, people want to buy that product before they even know everything about it because they've already bought into the brand. And pricing it at over $100 a bottle, it's not a quick buy. But people want to buy these products. They place immense value on these products because of the product story, but also the brand integrity that's attached to it. And I think that's the recognition that distillers and makers and thinkers have to acknowledge, is that there is this value that's non-monetary that they can attach to all their products, where so they can rise above the sea of craft products out there just by injecting that credibility.
Ultimately, the goodwill in companies becomes one of the most valuable assets. Yeah, the point that you're making there about intangible value 100% resonates. Where are you as a business pushing the conversation forward?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of it is, again, what we're talking about, really communicating something new in terms of content or a story, like through these brands, because a lot of it is, there's a lot of focus on, obviously, like, social media is an important avenue to sort of drive engagement, and it's critical. Also the venue experience itself. And, you know, like, we're always thinking about, in terms of every product we create or the venue itself, in terms of how can that content improve, or the creation of content improve within that space or through that product. So that's, I think, has become a real focus, is the actual content as a means to deliver that through digital applications. An example of that is, we've worked on a few F&B venues, and often we're talking with the architect or the interior designer, and we're creating this discussion of, well, people are standing here in the line. You need to create a moment, a social media moment, or what is it? You know, and it could be there's pastries on the bar, and how are you displaying them? Yeah, look, maybe from a operations perspective, keeping them all tucked away, they might be fresh, but actually keeping them out on display might help with the presentation. People might be prompted to take photos of them. Same when you're designing a product and packaging. You could spec all these incredible finishes, but in the end, we need to think about how people are sharing this product. How are we shooting content for that to be distributed to media, etc.? And so there's become a real shift around what's the image making process around this product venue, because it's an important part of amplifying the product and content being out there in the world beyond the lifespan of that product has existed. It lives on. And so I guess we tackle the design solution considering this extra factor now, which is an important part of how's the image making process going to benefit from the designs that we're putting forward now.
I might also add that the type of consumer that we work with is just a high discretionary spender, which we label as the neos. They make up a quarter of the Australian population, and they're growing. And what we're realizing is they're getting younger. And so the age bracket is so much broader these days. So going back to building on Matthew's comment, is we need to create a brand and content that has broader appeal, that can traverse someone that is 27, 25, all the way to 45. And we're doing it with independent brands that don't have pools of cash to draw from. And so it requires innovation, it requires creativity, it requires a very considered tone and balance of tone to get that right.
You said that the market is getting younger, the demographics getting younger. Can you expand on that just a little bit? And for what particular product or brand or business is that? Are you talking about hospitality? Are you talking about something else?
I'm talking broadly about premium artisanal products and venues. So any kind of product that is made well and that is, I guess, considered as a premium product, people are prepared to pay more for quality, and they value the quality and the story over the price. That's influencing their decision making. And the original, mindset many years ago was that you would have to reach a certain level of success or age and your maturity in your life to be buying into those products. But what we've realized is like people are drinking less but better. They're eating out less, but they're enjoying better quality food. And this is just across the board between food and beverage and wellness. And what we're saying is like we're getting briefs and they're targeting millennials as much as like the older demographic.
My question there is why? Why younger? Why is it a younger demographic? I know that we're speculating here on some pretty macro trends, but what is it that you think is really driving that younger market? Are they much larger forces with businesses trying to scramble for a younger audience that has a larger lifetime value? Is that really what they're looking for? Or what is it that you think is really driving that?
I think it's their access to information. Like they're so connected that their engagement is so high because they're the ones that are going to follow the rabbit hole, of information to discover who made the product, how it was made, where it was made. Now, what can you make from it? What cocktails can you make? Like their engagement is incredible. I think that is really important because as an audience, they're pushing the innovation because they're expecting more. They're becoming brand savvy, product savvy. So they're really driving trend, which is just something that we need to stand up and pay attention to.
With that, I mean, it makes me think, does that mean that millennials and the younger consumer more generally could be inflating marketing consumption figures? And in that market, they don't have as much disposable income. So it becomes more of a brand building exercise across the board. So brands should be focusing more of their time and attention on brand awareness and engagement rather than leads and converting those leads. That's what that sort of tells me. Is that what you guys have taken away from that observation?
I think in order to appeal and maintain loyalty of that type of consumer, you need to be super authentic. And it's about subtlety of the way you market and the way a brand is presented so that it isn't putting the sell on. It's actually drawing them in, a magnetic marketing approach where you're drawing them into the story as opposed to offering the value sell. And we seem to consider that more of a brand conversation than, say, a sales conversation.
Matthew, Terry, getting close to the end of the episode, I want to ask you, what is your biggest challenge as a business right now?
Matthew, did you want to answer that one?
I think the biggest challenge as a business right now in this current climate is the challenges with collaborating. We're a tactile, physical agency that really needs to collaborate daily in person. And so I guess the isolation and working remotely has obviously pushed us to creatively problem solve it and get ourselves organized. But the need for one-on-one contact just generally, and we were talking about, recently about having that time with clients where you're sitting down in a relaxed atmosphere and you're really getting them to open up about what their needs, wants, desires, what's driving them, the passion. I think it's something that personalized contact really requires. And it's also just those moments from within the studio environment where we need to come together regularly. And I guess the best ideas come when we're just like someone's having a curry or made this ridiculous Reuben sandwich and you're just talking about this idea. It's impromptu, it's spontaneous.
Yeah, the lack of spontaneity poses its own challenges as well. But I also feel on the client side of things is, everyone's scrutinizing costs, and all creative studios or all businesses in general need to reassess what their value pitch is. What's our proposition? And so the challenge that we're facing is we need to look at what businesses in our space value most in this current climate. And so if we're offering a complete brand from the ground up, or we're evolving an existing one for a new era of growth, then what are those things that are going to transform that business in this current climate? That's what we're constantly talking about these days. How can we evolve Squad Inc. to better meet those needs?
Just to wrap up that question, how are you adapting then to inspire that spontaneity in your clients or prospective clients when you have those early level meetings?
I guess it's just about creating those moments or those opportunities where it becomes more of a relaxed social meeting opposed to rigid structure. And yes, we do have to do strategic workshops where we have to get through information, but it's about more contact. And I think that's the key thing. It's just 101, pick up the phone, have a chat. Did you hear about this brand? Did you hear about like what's happening here? And just creating those moments where it's not just about the project. It's about understanding, getting their perspective on what this other brand's doing, because that's when these opportunities arise. And same goes with the team as well. We need to take them out of the restraints of time restrictions to deliver this packaging or this brand within these set hours, because creativity or the best ideas or the best creativity can't be confined to kind of rigidity.
Yes. Ultimately, where do you want Squad Inc. to be? What does success of your business look like to you?
Yeah, success for our business is when, we're not just looked at as a design agency that creates brand identities or builds brands in the traditional means. Squad Inc. is more than a design agency. They're innovators within the product or venue space. It's about us going further back than the creation of the identity, and it should come to the idea, what is the product idea? What is the venue idea? And really have some input and some involvement early on. And we have had that opportunity in a couple of projects, a few projects, but really I'd like that to be part of the engagement of Squad Inc. is we're here to sort of nurture this from the smallest seed of an idea of the product or venue, from liquid or the concept itself all the way through to launch.
And what about your business more broadly? Do you have an objective as to, is it something that's fueling your careers, or is it something you want to exit eventually? Is it something, on a larger perspective, is there something that you have in mind for Squad Inc.?
We don't see Squad Inc. as a business that will eventually exit. We see Squad Inc. as a vehicle or a machine that supports other ventures. So, we're currently exploring a range of different ventures and products that we can develop with the support of a creative machine such as Squad Inc., partnering with consultants, experts in other areas of our industry to develop something that is cutting edge. And we're excited by that because it gives us our edge to create something that is creative idea forward. And obviously to have an arsenal that we have here of creatives to deliver that is kind of where we see Squad Inc. evolving. Is it's a conduit to other ventures.
Fantastic. Last question for you guys today. Much easier one. Who would you like to hear on the show?
I'd love to see or hear Josh Nilland talk about his fish butchery and how he's innovated that space.
Fantastic. Terry, someone else you have in mind, or Josh?
I think it's Josh. Yeah.
That's a pretty confident answer then. 2 votes for Josh. I'll have to have a chat with him then. Thank you very much, Terry, Matthew, for being on the program today. It's been a pleasure having you on.
Thanks, mate.
Thanks, James.
This program is hosted by James Henderson, with technical production by Jake Olver. Voiceovers were by Angus Brennan and Shim Phelan. Thanks to our distribution team, led by Stephanie Holland, and a special thanks to you for tuning in every week. This program was produced by H Media. We'll see you soon.